The grand hall sparkled with a brilliance that seemed almost unreal, each crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceilings scattering light in delicate prisms across the polished marble floors. The soft hum of classical music mingled with the low murmur of conversations, punctuated occasionally by the delicate clink of champagne glasses. Every corner of the room was meticulously decorated with arrangements of exotic flowers, their fragrance subtly mingling with the crisp scent of expensive perfumes worn by the gala's elite attendees. Waiters in pristine uniforms glided through the crowd, offering trays of delicate hors d'oeuvres and flutes of the finest champagne, the effervescence catching the light with every gentle sway. The atmosphere was one of opulence and exclusivity, a celebration of wealth and social standing where every guest seemed to compete silently for attention and approval. Alexander Whitmore entered with an air of calculated confidence, the kind of presence that demanded attention without effort. He was the epitome of polished arrogance, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, shoes gleaming under the soft glow of the chandeliers. By his side walked Victoria Lane, radiant in a dress that shimmered like liquid gold, hugging her figure and accentuating her allure. Her smile was dazzling, magnetic, and entirely aware of the eyes following her every movement. Alexander's hand rested possessively on her waist, a subtle declaration of status, not just to the crowd but to everyone who dared glance at them. Their entrance drew a wave of admiring whispers, a mixture of envy, admiration, and a hint of judgment from the more discerning guests. Evelyn Whitmore, meanwhile, lingered near the entrance, hesitating. Her dress was elegant but understated, a soft ivory fabric that complemented her pregnant form without drawing too much attention. Unlike Victoria's dazzling presence, Evelyn's elegance was quiet, refined, and deliberately modest. She could feel the stares before she even fully stepped into the room, some curious, some pitying, and some subtly mocking. The undercurrents of gossip were palpable, whispered comments weaving around the grand hall like invisible threads, noting the contrast between the flamboyant mistress and the subdued wife. She felt exposed, vulnerable in the very room that celebrated extravagance, each glance from a guest a silent judgment on her perceived inadequacies. Alexander's smile was thin, almost predatory, as he subtly guided Evelyn further into the room. His eyes, however, held a sharp glint of anticipation, a knowledge of the humiliation he intended to orchestrate. Guests moved aside politely, sensing the tension without knowing its source, and the whispered exchanges intensified as people sensed the drama that was about to unfold. Every delicate detail, from the flicker of candlelight on the tables to the soft rustle of silk gowns, seemed to accentuate the growing unease. In that moment, Evelyn felt the weight of the entire gala pressing down upon her, the opulence around her now a stark backdrop to the emotional storm that Alexander's calculated arrogance was about to unleash. Alexander's voice cut through the soft murmur of the gala, sharp and deliberate, carrying easily across the room. "Evelyn," he began, his tone deceptively polite yet laced with unmistakable condescension, "I see you've decided to join us tonight. How brave of you." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd, a subtle mix of curiosity and apprehension. Evelyn's chest tightened, her grip on her clutch growing firmer as she forced a polite smile. The words, though seemingly casual, carried the weight of humiliation, their sting magnified by the elegance of the setting and the attentive audience. Alexander's gaze roamed the room, as if inviting the guests to scrutinize his pregnant wife alongside him. "And what an interesting choice of gown," he continued, deliberately loud enough for nearby attendees to hear, his tone silky with mockery. "Soft, modest, certainly. Practical. Very maternal, wouldn't you say?" Laughter, delicate and restrained, rippled from a few nearby guests, though many shifted uncomfortably, unsure of whether to laugh or look away. Evelyn's cheeks burned, a mixture of shame and suppressed anger coursing through her veins. She wanted to shrink into the shadows, to disappear, but she remained upright, maintaining the poise her mother had taught her, even as her heart pounded fiercely. The words struck deeper than mere mockery. They targeted her identity, her pregnancy, and her perceived inability to fit in with the glamorous, polished elite surrounding her. She felt the sharp edge of every eye, imagined the thoughts racing in every mind watching her fail to match the opulence that Victoria embodied so effortlessly. She remembered every moment Alexander had subtly demeaned her in private, each remark now amplified by the public stage he had carefully orchestrated. Anger and humiliation warred inside her, yet she kept her expression neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of witnessing her crumble. Victoria, on the other hand, thrived in the spectacle. Her lips curved into a smile, her eyes sparkling with admiration and subtle delight at Alexander's dominance, yet there was a faint flicker of unease behind her excitement. She recognized the power in the moment, her presence amplified Alexander's control, but also sensed the tension escalating beyond mere social theatrics. A tiny tremor of doubt nudged at her consciousness. Could the humiliation go too far? For now, she masked it, choosing instead to enjoy the attention and the subtle validation Alexander's cruel jest afforded her. The other guests were caught in a mixture of emotions. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances, uneasy at the brazenness of Alexander's public denigration, while others snickered quietly, drawn into the spectacle of high society drama. The atmosphere felt taut, a fragile web of judgment and curiosity spun tightly around the three figures at its center. Evelyn's inner turmoil mirrored the collective tension: shame, anger, disbelief, and an icy determination to endure and, perhaps, to retaliate. Alexander's calculated cruelty, Evelyn's silent resilience, and Victoria's conflicted admiration created a volatile triangle, each interaction a spark ready to ignite further conflict. Every whispered comment, every subtle shift in posture, and every glance exchanged in the room heightened the psychological tension, leaving no doubt that the night would not unfold as smoothly as the glittering chandeliers above suggested. Among the crowd, murmurs began to circulate like an undercurrent beneath the gala's polished surface. Some guests approached Evelyn with tentative smiles, offering soft words of reassurance. "Don't mind him," one whispered, placing a delicate hand on her arm, while another leaned in, murmuring, "He always enjoys making a scene." These discreet gestures were fleeting, careful not to draw Alexander's attention, yet they provided a small, fragile comfort amid the sting of public humiliation. Evelyn's lips curved into a subtle, grateful smile, her eyes betraying nothing of the storm raging within her. She absorbed these quiet consolations like water on parched earth, knowing that her strength, however restrained, would be the instrument of her response. Meanwhile, other guests exchanged knowing glances, aligning themselves either with Alexander's dominance or Victoria's charm. Some lingered near the couple, laughing lightly at the insinuations, eager to bask in the reflected power of Alexander's calculated cruelty. Others quietly distanced themselves, preferring to avoid the drama or silently expressing disapproval through sidelong looks and delicate frowns. The social landscape was a delicate web of alliances, loyalties, and opportunistic positioning, with each observer playing their role in the subtle theater of high society. Among the crowd, a sharp-eyed journalist leaned slightly against a marble pillar, notebook in hand, capturing the unfolding spectacle with meticulous attention. Every word, every glance, every carefully crafted insult was recorded, each observation noting Alexander's manipulative nature and the intricate psychological tension he wielded effortlessly. The journalist's presence was unassuming but watchful, a silent witness to the cruelty and imbalance that underpinned the glamorous facade of the evening. Victoria's initial exhilaration began to waver as she caught glimpses of subtle reactions in the crowd. The smiles of some guests were hesitant, their eyes flickering toward Alexander with disapproval or quiet disbelief. The realization crept in that the public spectacle might spiral beyond control, that the humiliation Alexander imposed could reflect poorly on them both. Unease mingled with her vanity, producing a quiet tension that she struggled to mask behind her sparkling smile. Evelyn, meanwhile, remained poised, her inner mind already plotting the contours of a response. She observed the crowd, noting allies and potential witnesses, the angles that could be used to reclaim her dignity and challenge Alexander's authority. Each whispered comment and lingering gaze became part of her mental map, a network of observations feeding the strategy that would allow her to transform public shame into empowerment. The seeds of her quiet revolution were planted, hidden beneath the calm exterior, waiting for the perfect moment to grow. The room fell into a brittle silence, the kind that made every soft laugh and murmur seem painfully loud. Alexander's smile twisted, a gleam of malice flickering in his eyes as he leaned slightly toward the crowd, ensuring everyone could hear. "And look at Evelyn," he said, his tone sugary sweet yet venomous. "Trying so hard to appear sophisticated, though we all know her mind doesn't quite match the effort. And, of course, carrying that little one." He gestured subtly toward her pregnant form, his words dripping with calculated cruelty. "It seems even that little miracle can't fix what nature forgot." Gasps echoed through the hall. Some guests stiffened, horrified by the audacity of his words. Others looked away, embarrassed to witness such theatrical humiliation. Evelyn's chest tightened, a shock of disbelief running through her veins, followed almost immediately by a searing burn of anger. Her hands gripped her clutch with quiet ferocity as the sting of his mockery sank in. Every word felt like a spotlight on her vulnerabilities, each syllable a calculated wound designed to strip away her composure. Yet she remained upright, her jaw set, her gaze steady, refusing to give him the gratification of an outward reaction. Victoria, however, faltered. The cruel spectacle, meant to display Alexander's dominance, seemed to tip over even her polished expectations. Her lips parted, and a sharp intake of breath betrayed the shock she felt at the extremity of his mockery. The laughter that had danced in her eyes moments before vanished, replaced by pale confusion and alarm. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she crumpled to the ground in a faint, the shimmering gown cascading around her like a spilled pool of gold. A ripple of chaos erupted instantly. Guests leapt forward in concern, some exclaiming, some frozen in disbelief. Staff rushed from all directions, supporting Victoria, attempting to revive her while murmuring hurried apologies and assurances, trying to regain order in the suddenly disrupted gala. Amid the turmoil, Evelyn's emotions churned in a complex storm. Conflicted relief washed over her. Victoria's faint momentarily diverted attention from her own humiliation, but it was entwined with disbelief and simmering anger at Alexander's relentless cruelty. Her mind sharpened with clarity, each insult feeding the resolve quietly growing inside her. Alexander, meanwhile, attempted to salvage the situation, smoothing his expression and gesturing for the staff to handle the fainting, his practiced charm straining to mask the faltering control he had over the unfolding scene. The hall buzzed with whispered questions and incredulous stares, the grandeur of the gala overshadowed by the scandal erupting at its center. Every glance from the guests, every shuffle and muttered apology, heightened the tension, the room a precarious balance of shock, pity, and anticipation. Evelyn, standing amid the chaos, felt the first real stirrings of empowerment, the recognition that her quiet endurance might yet turn this night of public humiliation into a stage for her own subtle, inevitable victory. Evelyn stood quietly to the side, her hands clasped over her abdomen, her expression serene yet impossibly alert. Around her, the gala continued to pulse with whispers, concerned glances, and the flustered movements of staff attending to Victoria. The chaos that had erupted moments ago might have unseated a lesser woman, but Evelyn had learned early in life the art of restraint, the power of measured observation. She did not speak, did not flinch, but inwardly her mind raced, analyzing every angle, every opportunity, every weakness that Alexander had unwittingly exposed in his performance of cruelty. Her silence was not a sign of defeat. It was the beginning of a strategy that only she fully understood, a plan to reclaim not just her dignity but also the respect she had long been denied. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the subtle alliances forming in real time. A few trusted friends hovered at respectful distances, casting discreet, supportive glances her way, while members of the staff, sympathetic to her plight, exchanged small nods and murmurs that only she could decipher. One confidant in particular, a longtime assistant who had observed Alexander's manipulative patterns for years, quietly approached and whispered suggestions, details on how to use the evening's turmoil to her advantage without causing further scandal. Evelyn absorbed each piece of information, filing it away like a master strategist, calculating the perfect moments to act when Alexander's arrogance would leave him vulnerable. Every detail mattered, the way the guests' eyes shifted toward Alexander in reaction to Victoria's fainting, the subtle exchanges of judgment and sympathy, the expressions of shock and disapproval that could be leveraged. She considered her responses carefully, knowing that any misstep could hand Alexander further control. Her plan was not impulsive, it was meticulous, aimed at a slow, almost imperceptible reclamation of power. She would not humiliate him in the same brazen way he had humiliated her. but she would ensure that the evening's events subtly yet unmistakably exposed his cruelty to all who had gathered. In the quiet corners of the gala, Evelyn also nurtured a growing sense of self-worth, a realization that Alexander's attempts to shame her revealed more about his character than her own. The sting of his words no longer had the power to define her. Instead, they illuminated the clarity with which she could now see him. Every insult became a stepping stone, every sneer a lesson in patience and strategy. Her silence was her shield and her weapon, her composed demeanor a mask that concealed a mind sharpened by betrayal and injustice. As the night stretched on, Evelyn moved subtly through the room, engaging in polite, controlled conversations, planting small seeds of impression that would later grow into undeniable influence. Every gesture, every smile, every careful observation was intentional, designed to reframe the narrative of the evening in her favor. By maintaining calm and projecting strength, she became the silent center around which the gala's energy now revolved, a quiet force preparing to overturn the spectacle of cruelty with measured precision. The power of restraint, she realized, could be far more devastating than any rash outburst. Alexander's humiliation had only opened the door for her inevitable and meticulously orchestrated reversal. By the next morning, the gala was no longer confined to the glittering ballroom or the whispered corridors of high society. It had spilled into the world at large. Video clips, hastily recorded by guests' phones, began circulating across social media platforms, capturing Alexander's cruel barbs, Victoria's fainting, and Evelyn's composed endurance. The footage was clipped, selective, and yet undeniably damning. Tweets and posts proliferated almost instantly. "Did you see Alexander Whitmore last night? Cruel beyond belief." And, "Evelyn Whitmore handled herself with such grace. True strength," appeared side by side with sarcastic remarks, mocking Alexander's theatrics. The incident became the talk of elite circles, the scandal impossible to contain within the confines of polite society. Alexander paced in his office the following morning, the footage playing repeatedly on his assistant's tablet. Each replay sent a fresh pulse of frustration through him. His carefully cultivated image of control, sophistication, and power was unraveling, fragment by fragment. "How did this get out?" he demanded, his voice taut with anger. "I was subtle. I controlled everything in that room. How could they make it look like I'm the villain?" His assistant avoided eye contact, muttering apologies while Alexander's hands clenched into fists. The meticulous mask he wore at the gala had dissolved into public ridicule, and he could feel the tightening grip of humiliation that even wealth and influence could not instantly erase. Victoria, too, found herself grappling with the fallout. Messages from friends and acquaintances flooded in, questioning the night's events and hinting at Alexander's cruelty. Her carefully maintained image as the dazzling, untouchable mistress was under threat, and with it came a gnawing sense of resentment. "I didn't sign up for this level of exposure," she muttered, scrolling through the endless posts, the golden glow of her earlier excitement now replaced by unease. Her admiration for Alexander's dominance wavered, tinged with frustration that the man she had flaunted her loyalty to had miscalculated so dramatically. Meanwhile, Evelyn's circle quietly celebrated the subtle shift of power. Friends and allies messaged congratulations and encouragement, commending her poise and intelligence. "You were incredible last night," one text read. "People are actually talking about how he humiliated himself more than you." Evelyn read the messages with a quiet smile, recognizing that the chaos created by Alexander's hubris had opened doors she had carefully planned to walk through. Every gasp, every snicker, every viral clip was now part of the narrative she could manipulate to her advantage. The public's reaction, fractured and intense, set the stage perfectly. Evelyn, once the subject of mockery, now held the potential to reclaim authority over the story. Alexander's image teetered, Victoria's confidence faltered, and the swirling gossip offered fertile ground for Evelyn to plant the seeds of her eventual, measured, and devastatingly effective retaliation. Evelyn found a quiet corner just beyond the main ballroom, a secluded area near the gallery where the marble floors met heavy velvet drapes. The distant hum of conversation filtered in through the thick fabric, but here, the noise felt distant, irrelevant. Alexander followed, his polished composure slightly frayed, his smile tight as if forcing itself back into place. Victoria lingered near the entrance, her posture stiff, eyes darting between the two, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Evelyn's gaze met Alexander's without hesitation. "Do you ever consider the consequences of your words?" she asked, her tone even but carrying a weight that made him pause. For a moment, his smug arrogance faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Consequences?" he repeated, as though testing the sound of the word. "I merely entertained the guests. It was all in good fun, Evelyn." "Surely, you exaggerate." "No," she said firmly, taking a step closer, her eyes unwavering. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You demeaned the life growing inside me, and you did it for your own amusement and to impress her. That is not fun. That is cruelty." Her words were precise, sharp, each syllable measured to pierce his carefully constructed arrogance. Alexander's jaw tightened, a subtle sign that her words had landed, though he masked it with a dismissive chuckle. Victoria watched silently, her earlier admiration replaced with curiosity and a faint sense of discomfort. She recognized the power in Evelyn's calm confrontation, the courage it took to face Alexander so directly. Her presence complicated the dynamic further. Alexander's attention now flickered between the two women, his usual control challenged by Evelyn's composed assertiveness and Victoria's subtle but growing judgment. "You think you're clever," Alexander said, his voice slightly strained, attempting to regain dominance. "Do you honestly believe you can undermine me with words alone?" "I don't need to undermine you," Evelyn replied, her voice steady and resolute. "You've already revealed everything I need to know about your character. Your arrogance, your cruelty, your need to control. It's all on display. I've endured enough, Alexander. And I will not stand silent any longer." Her composure radiated a quiet authority that made him shift uncomfortably. Alexander's defensive smile returned, forced and brittle. "You're overreacting," he said, though the tension in his posture betrayed the cracks forming in his confidence. Evelyn didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch, allowing the weight of her presence and the truth of her words to press upon him. Victoria's eyes widened subtly, recognizing the shift in power, the psychological dominance Evelyn had quietly cultivated over the course of the evening. The confrontation lingered, a taut moment suspended in time. Evelyn's measured strength and Alexander's faltering arrogance created a charged atmosphere, the unspoken tension threading through the space like an electric current. For the first time that evening, Alexander was truly unsettled, acutely aware that the balance of control had shifted, even if only slightly. Evelyn's silent confidence, her unwavering gaze, and the precise delivery of her words had recalibrated the power dynamic entirely, leaving Alexander exposed and uncertain, while Victoria wrestled with newfound respect and apprehension toward the woman she had once underestimated. Victoria lingered near the edge of the secluded gallery, her back pressed lightly against the wall, arms folded across her chest as she watched Evelyn confront Alexander. At first, she had felt a thrill, a rush of superiority and validation as Alexander's attention remained fixed on her presence. She had reveled in the subtle power she derived from being the object of his desire, the one who could provoke jealousy, command admiration, and bask in his arrogance reflected back at her. But now, witnessing the composure, intelligence, and moral courage with which Evelyn faced him, a disquieting sense of unease began to gnaw at Victoria's satisfaction. Her mind replayed the evening in fragmented sequences, the whispered mockery, the public humiliation, the fainting spell that had turned attention away from Evelyn momentarily. The thrill that had accompanied Alexander's calculated cruelty now felt hollow. Each taunt, each sneer, each cruelly orchestrated glance suddenly revealed a deeper truth she had ignored, the extent of Alexander's manipulative nature. He had used her as a prop, a living accessory in his theatrical display of dominance. She had been complicit, wittingly or not, in the degradation of a woman who did not deserve it, and the realization left a sharp ache of guilt and vulnerability. Victoria's gaze shifted to Evelyn, noticing the quiet strength in her posture, the unwavering confidence in her eyes, and the subtle, controlled defiance in her every movement. In contrast, Victoria saw herself, poised, glamorous, yet entirely exposed to manipulation, dependent on Alexander's approval for validation. The comparison was uncomfortable but enlightening. For the first time, she understood that admiration and influence were not guaranteed by charm or beauty alone. They required integrity, patience, and a backbone that she had failed to cultivate. A pivotal moment struck her when Evelyn's calm, strategic silence made Alexander flinch, his control slipping with every measured word. Victoria felt a pang of recognition. The woman she had dismissed, underestimated, and even envied held a power she herself lacked. In that instant, Victoria's internal allegiance began to shift. She understood that continuing to side blindly with Alexander would only prolong her entanglement in his toxic web. She could either remain complicit, risking further exposure and moral compromise, or choose a different path. To distance herself, to observe, and perhaps eventually support Evelyn in ways subtle yet consequential. The choice crystallized in her mind, quiet but resolute. She would no longer be a passive participant in Alexander's cruel games. The evening's events had revealed not just Evelyn's resilience but also her own vulnerability and capacity for reflection. Victoria's next steps, deliberate and measured, would alter the dynamics entirely, marking the beginning of a transformation that neither Alexander nor Evelyn could yet fully predict. Victoria lingered near the edge of the secluded gallery, her back pressed lightly against the wall, arms folded across her chest as she watched Evelyn confront Alexander. At first, she had felt a thrill, a rush of superiority and validation as Alexander's attention remained fixed on her presence. She had reveled in the subtle power she derived from being the object of his desire, the one who could provoke jealousy, command admiration, and bask in his arrogance reflected back at her. But now, witnessing the composure, intelligence, and moral courage with which Evelyn faced him, a disquieting sense of unease began to gnaw at Victoria's satisfaction. Her mind replayed the evening in fragmented sequences, the whispered mockery, the public humiliation, the fainting spell that had turned attention away from Evelyn momentarily. The thrill that had accompanied Alexander's calculated cruelty now felt hollow. Each taunt, each sneer, each cruelly orchestrated glance suddenly revealed a deeper truth she had ignored, the extent of Alexander's manipulative nature. He had used her as a prop, a living accessory in his theatrical display of dominance. She had been complicit, wittingly or not, in the degradation of a woman who did not deserve it, and the realization left a sharp ache of guilt and vulnerability. Victoria's gaze shifted to Evelyn, noticing the quiet strength in her posture, the unwavering confidence in her eyes, and the subtle, controlled defiance in her every movement. In contrast, Victoria saw herself, poised, glamorous, yet entirely exposed to manipulation, dependent on Alexander's approval for validation. The comparison was uncomfortable but enlightening. For the first time, she understood that admiration and influence were not guaranteed by charm or beauty alone. They required integrity, patience, and a backbone that she had failed to cultivate. A pivotal moment struck her when Evelyn's calm, strategic silence made Alexander flinch, his control slipping with every measured word. Victoria felt a pang of recognition. The woman she had dismissed, underestimated, and even envied held a power she herself lacked. In that instant, Victoria's internal allegiance began to shift. She understood that continuing to side blindly with Alexander would only prolong her entanglement in his toxic web. She could either remain complicit, risking further exposure and moral compromise, or choose a different path. To distance herself, to observe, and perhaps eventually support Evelyn in ways subtle yet consequential. The choice crystallized in her mind, quiet but resolute. She would no longer be a passive participant in Alexander's cruel games. The evening's events had revealed not just Evelyn's resilience but also her own vulnerability and capacity for reflection. Victoria's next steps, deliberate and measured, would alter the dynamics entirely, marking the beginning of a transformation that neither Alexander nor Evelyn could yet fully predict. Evelyn returned to the center of the ballroom with a calm, deliberate grace that immediately drew the attention of every guest. The soft rustle of her gown seemed almost inaudible against the lingering murmurs of the crowd, yet her presence cut through the tension like a quiet beacon. Guests who had initially been curious about the drama now paused, sensing that something important was about to unfold. Evelyn's posture was impeccable, her face serene, her eyes calm but keenly aware of every glance, every whispered reaction. There was no trace of fear, no hint of embarrassment, only a poised confidence that seemed to radiate from her very being. Raising her glass delicately, Evelyn began a toast, her voice clear and composed. "Tonight," she said, allowing her words to carry across the room, "we celebrate not only success and beauty but also integrity, compassion, and resilience. Moments like these remind us that true strength is not measured by wealth or power, but by the grace and courage with which we face life's challenges." Her words were carefully chosen, subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation, yet sharp in their implication. Alexander's cruelty, the humiliation he had attempted to inflict, was reflected back upon him without her needing to utter a single accusation. The room fell silent, the elegance of her delivery captivating every ear and drawing admiration in hushed waves. The applause began gradually, polite at first, then swelling into a genuine acknowledgement of her composure. Conversations that had centered around Alexander's theatrics shifted, replaced by admiration for Evelyn's dignity and presence. Whispers floated through the crowd. "She handled it with such grace, she truly embodies strength." Some guests nodded in discreet acknowledgement, while others offered subtle smiles, recognizing that Evelyn's quiet authority had now claimed the attention and respect of the entire room. Alexander's face tightened with frustration. His carefully constructed image of control and superiority was unraveling right before him. The power he had wielded so effortlessly throughout the evening slipped further with every polite nod, every appreciative glance directed at Evelyn. He attempted to redirect the attention with small gestures, a practiced smile, or a casual comment, but the momentum of Evelyn's quiet triumph left him increasingly irrelevant, a man visibly struggling to maintain the illusion of dominance. Victoria watched closely, a mixture of admiration and envy washing over her. She had once enjoyed the thrill of Alexander's attention, but now she could not ignore Evelyn's undeniable strength and poise. A pang of respect mingled with the lingering bitterness of comparison. Victoria recognized that the power Evelyn wielded was rooted not in flamboyance or beauty, but in resilience, intelligence, and self-assurance. Evelyn's subtle victory resonated through the gala without a single act of overt humiliation toward Alexander. She had reclaimed her narrative, shifting the balance of influence and respect in her favor, all while maintaining composure and elegance. The room's attention now centered on her, not as a figure of pity, but as one of admiration, quietly triumphant and undeniably formidable. The crowd, Alexander, and Victoria all absorbed the shift, recognizing that Evelyn's grace and strategic intelligence had turned a night of potential disgrace into a statement of undeniable empowerment. In the days following the gala, Alexander's carefully curated public image began to crumble in ways he had not anticipated. Social media clips of the night went viral, circulating among news outlets and elite gossip pages. The sharpness of his cruelty and the stark contrast of Evelyn's poise were discussed endlessly, shared with commentary that ranged from outraged to admiring. Invitations to certain social events began to dwindle, and whispers of his arrogance spread beyond the walls of the gala, reaching business associates and industry peers who once considered him untouchable. What he had thought of as harmless theatrics had transformed into a slow, relentless erosion of his credibility and influence. Evelyn, meanwhile, navigated the aftermath with quiet determination. Her measured composure, cultivated during the events of the gala, allowed her to reclaim control over the narrative. She responded to inquiries and social chatter with elegance, never appearing defensive, instead projecting a sense of strength that only magnified Alexander's apparent fragility. Every interview, every social interaction reinforced her intelligence and grace, highlighting the stark contrast between her resilience and Alexander's impulsive cruelty. Victoria's role further complicated Alexander's unraveling. She had spent time reflecting on the evening, recognizing not only Alexander's manipulative tendencies but also the way she had been complicit in his cruel games. Her decision crystallized: she would no longer serve as a pawn in his machinations. Choosing her own integrity over vanity, she confronted Alexander privately, her words a mixture of reproach and finality. "I won't be part of this anymore," she said, her voice steady but firm. The statement, simple yet resolute, struck Alexander harder than any public embarrassment. She was leaving him, removing her complicity, and exposing yet another facet of his isolation. The combination of social scrutiny, Victoria's departure, and Evelyn's strategic poise created a perfect storm that Alexander could not withstand. His arrogance, which had once allowed him to dominate any room, now left him exposed to ridicule, loss of influence, and personal humiliation. Yet amidst his downfall, Evelyn's growth and newfound strength shone unmistakably. She had transformed adversity into empowerment, reclaiming her dignity and asserting control over both her narrative and her future. Even as Alexander reeled from the consequences of his actions, a subtle tension lingered, an acknowledgement that while justice had been served in the immediate sense, the relationships, reputations, and emotional scars created during the gala would continue to ripple outward. Evelyn's triumph was complete, yet it carried the weight of experience, ensuring she would never be undermined so easily again. Evelyn sat in the quiet of her study, the evening sunlight filtering through the tall windows and casting soft patterns across the room. The world outside moved on as if the gala, and the chaos it had unleashed, were nothing more than a distant memory, yet within her, the echoes of that night remained vivid. She reflected on the journey from humiliation to empowerment, marveling at how a single evening had tested the limits of her patience, resilience, and inner strength. The cruel words of Alexander, the spectacle of Victoria's fainting, and the whispers of gossip had all become part of a narrative she had quietly transformed into her own victory. Cradling her growing abdomen, Evelyn felt a profound sense of connection with her unborn child, a life that symbolized hope, continuity, and untainted potential. Every kick, every movement, seemed to affirm her determination to protect and nurture what truly mattered. She had learned that true power was not measured by wealth, influence, or public perception, but by the dignity with which one navigates adversity. The humiliation she had endured became a teacher, shaping her into a woman who could assert herself with calm authority, who could reclaim her narrative without stooping to cruelty, and who could find strength even in the face of betrayal. Victoria, in her own reflection, recognized that the events of the gala had shifted her perspective as well. The admiration she once craved from Alexander had given way to a deeper understanding of self-worth and integrity. She realized that complicity in cruelty carried a cost far greater than she had ever anticipated, and that true respect was earned through courage, empathy, and decisiveness rather than beauty or charm. Though her path diverged from Evelyn's, the lessons of that night lingered, planting seeds of introspection and potential change. Alexander's downfall, though dramatic and public, served as a cautionary tale rather than an endpoint. The consequences of arrogance and cruelty rippled through his world, leaving him exposed and humbled. Evelyn's triumph, while satisfying, also carried a subtle reminder that vigilance, discernment, and strategic patience were lifelong necessities in navigating relationships, power, and society. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow across the room, Evelyn allowed herself a quiet smile. She had emerged from the storm stronger, wiser, and more self-assured, fully aware that life would continue to challenge her in unexpected ways. Yet she felt ready, grounded in her dignity, and supported by the quiet strength of her inner convictions. The story of that night, though concluded in public, left lingering questions, subtle tensions, and the promise of future encounters. But Evelyn knew she would meet them with the same grace, resilience, and intelligence that had carried her through her darkest hours.